pre-announced it a little bit to the press so that people would know and people would want to come. Today I'm going to just start off talking about the history of L0phtCrack and sort of how do we end up where we are today. L0phtCrack's been around for 12 years, which is it's interesting with security products that last that long. It means the problem really hasn't gone away, right? So we still have this problem with passwords in general, password quality in general, and the legacy of Microsoft's backwards compatibility is still with us, and that's a benefit and a problem for Microsoft that they've been so popular 10 years ago that they're still living with code that they're just end-of-lifing now. I think NT was just end-of-life last year, and of course Windows 2000 is still pretty popular out there in the marketplace. My dad works at GE, and I was shocked when GE's standard image last year for laptops was a Windows 2000 machine. That's a pretty big company. It's a lot of laptops all running on Windows 2000. So it's still out there. So L0phtCrack 1 was released in 1997, full 12, almost exactly 12 years ago. We'll be coming up with it next month. And the first version was really just a proof of concept. The idea was pwdump was out there. Was that Jeremy Allison wrote that?
Yeah.
Jeremy Allison from, is that the Samba project? Is that where he's from?
Yeah.
So Jeremy was part of the Samba project, was working on compatibility with authentication, and he wrote this tool pwdump that dumped the password hashes, and this really was this was really this was the critical thing that happened was as soon as we had those password hashes, then people started to say, well, how do we crack it? Before this happened in early '97, no one even thought about Microsoft passwords really. It was just sort of, people knew about Unix passwords, people knew how you could crack them, people knew that if you had a strong one, it was going to take a long time to crack them. And people just assumed, Microsoft was using DES, they're using MD4, there was just an assumption that it was secure. But as soon as Jeremy Allison was able to dump the hashes, people said, well, let's implement a cracker for these hashes. And this is when Mudge, who unfortunately can't be here today, started looking at, how do I implement a cracker for these password hashes. And as we started to look at it more and more, we said, wait a minute, there's all kinds of implementation problems with the way that Microsoft is storing this landman hash as, all uppercase in 2 chunks of 7, so you don't have to brute force anything more than 7 characters long. And we realized that it's going to be trivial to do dictionary attacks and brute forces on this. So as a proof of concept, L0phtCrack 1.0 came out really as just a proof of concept. We had no idea that we were ever going to turn into a product. It was just, let's show how easy it is to crack passwords. And this was back in the L0pht days. This was the whole thing. You want to demonstrate the problem so people will fix it. So Microsoft pretty quickly realized that this was a big problem that had to be fixed. Microsoft's solution was to add another layer of encryption on top of the SAM, which was storing the hashes, and they came out with the sys key, which was let's obfuscate some other key somewhere that's going to take a long time for people to figure out where this key is, and we'll put another layer of encryption on top of it. As a security guy, you say, well, this is just a totally horrible solution, right? Eventually, someone's going to reverse engineer how to get that key. They'll decrypt it, and we'll be back to where we started from. Microsoft thought ahead and said, but you can put the key on a floppy, and when you boot the machine, then you can take that floppy out, and it's going to be really hard now. It'll be in memory, but it'll be even harder to find this key. And it'll only be, and if the machine is shut down, you can't find the key. Well, this is totally unworkable. Who's going to stick a floppy in their machine every time they boot it? It's just ridiculous. So I never even heard of anyone even doing this, but it was one of these things where they said, oh, we have a solution to the problem. So eventually someone came out with a dumping utility that worked on syskey machines. That happened pretty quickly. And so we got into this thing where there was all these the tools were coming out to sniff hashes as they went over the wire, dump hashes from different scenarios. And we said, you know what, let's take all these little disparate pieces of tools together and incorporate them all into L0phtCrack. And this is where we started to actually say, this is a product now, because we're actually building in functionality. It's not a proof of concept anymore. We're actually making it easy for a system administrator to crack passwords. And that's really when L0phtCrack 1.5 was born. It only took us about 4 months, but this was sort of the next chasm. This was like, now it's going to be a product. And we said, okay, well, this has value to system administrators. It's not just a proof of concept, because if there's weak passwords being used, they should find out about them. This is before there was pass-filter, or there was any kind of password quality checking out there. So we came with L0phtCrack 1.5, and we said, let's put a shareware license on it. Shareware was kind of big in the late 90s. I don't think anyone uses that term anymore. But we said, we'll put a shareware license on it. We'll put a license on it and say, if you're a corporation or the government and you're using this in a for-profit way, you're a legitimate business and all that, well, you should send us $50. So it was just a shareware license. It was just the license that comes with the tool. You could download it for free, and very popular. We had a lot of downloads. Can anyone guess how many organizations paid us $50 for L0phtCrack 1.5?
One.
You must have heard the story. So one organization. So in a whole, let's see, it was about 6 months from 797 to 298, 6-7 months. One organization paid us. It was the Government Accounting Office. The Government Accounting Office, which I'm sure is has billions and billions of dollars of budget, bought one copy for $50. One copy. And that was the only copy we sold. So we said, okay, we now have empirical data that shareware does not work. Because we're pretty sure more than one organization is using this product, because we had hundreds of thousands of downloads. So really, L0phtCrack 2 was, we said, all right, let's put in a license key mechanism. And let's see, and you have to actually send us money before we send you the license key, and it will time out. And we just implemented Mudge used to brag that it was so easy to crack that, if you were the bad guy, you still got your free copy. So it was really a very simple mechanism. And of course, it showed up as a cracked version on Wares boards and things like that. But the interesting thing was, now all of a sudden we were selling hundreds of copies a month. So now we said, well, not only people are willing to download it, but they're willing to actually pay for it. So that was sort of 98 with version 2 was sort of the birth of commercial L0phtCrack, and we started over time building features into it. Then in around 2000, the L0pht got bought by @Stake, and actually L0phtCrack was sort of a separate thing. They didn't want to buy all of our intellectual property, but we eventually ended up saying, okay, well, it makes sense to sell L0phtCrack to @Stake, and @Stake added a lot of features over time. Support for rainbow tables, support for dumping passwords from Unix systems, scheduling, so you could just automate the process. Remediation, so you could just click, you could just say, all right, all these passwords that I cracked with a dictionary or with brute force within a day or whatever your constraint was, you could just say, select all those, and you could say, okay, force a password reset for all those, or lock out all these accounts. So that, the remediation. And then in 2004, @Stake got bought by Symantec. And L0phtCrack was actually generating revenue, and so they continued to sell it for a little while, and then they said, this really doesn't really fit into our business. Symantec really isn't a security tool company. It's more of a security infrastructure company, right? Let's put in gateways. Let's put in host agents. It's not a tool. They don't really have tools for auditing systems. And
nobody could picture Norton Crack.
There was no Norton Crack. So they end-of-lifed it, and that was kind of a sad day for us because this was sort of our baby, and it was kind of interesting to see it move into these successfully larger companies. And when that happened, we said, is there any way that we could, after about a year, we said, there's got to be a way that we can get this technology back in our hands if they're not going to sell it. And so I began about a year ago the long effort of dealing with a large corporation with dozens of lawyers on staff, and trying to figure out a way to purchase it back from them. So we did that, and we did that about, I don't know, finally closed about January, so it hasn't been that long. So we haven't had a lot of time to develop a lot of new features. So the idea really is to, there's a screenshot of it. The idea of it is to just get it available again, get it out on the market again as quickly as possible, and bring it up to date with 64-bit support, because that's really been the thing that's lacking. Is it doesn't work on a 64-bit machine. You can't dump.
Doesn't work on Vista.
Doesn't work on Vista, right? So it doesn't work on Vista. Doesn't work on 64-bit XP. Doesn't work on 64-bit 2003 or Server 2008. And doesn't work on Windows 7. So adding that support was really the first thing because we wanted to work on all those systems, and just to overhaul the UI. The UI was getting a little stale and not non-Vista-y. I think it looked very Windows 2000.
Windows 95.
Windows 95. So that's really the push of the last couple months, was just to bring it up to date and get it back on the market so people can buy it. But now we have something that we can start to build on. So we figured, there's other free tools out there. There's other commercial tools out there. We wanted to make it, reasonably priced, and we don't like the notion of this one. You have the 10 account license and the 100 account license and the 500 account license. So we just simplified things. It's you can use it to audit unlimited accounts. Practically over 100,000 accounts. Last I checked, really gets kind of slow.
Well, yeah.
But who has a domain with 100,000 accounts besides Microsoft, right?
You might want to break that up on your machines.
Maybe the Postal Service or Walmart or something. I don't know if every employee has a domain login.
It's practical up to about 10,000 accounts per copy, and then you might want to have a few.
And so we used to have 3 different versions of it, and really the breakdown of the different versions is between Pro and Administrator. Administrator is really set up to be like an enterprise-wide for a domain admin to be able to dump hashes from multiple machines on a regularly scheduled basis, bring all those hashes local and crack them, and then do some sort of remediation on them if you find problems. So the Pro is really meant for the sort of the small business that may have one domain, and the Administrator is really meant for a large organization that has many domains or many different hosts with local. They want to dump the passwords locally. And the Consultant version is really meant for people who roam around and need to run this on many, many different machines. They need to install it wherever they want. So those are basically 3 versions. Keep it relatively simple. So some of the future directions we want to take L0phtCrack in. We don't think that password cracking is dead quite yet. As long as people are using passwords, cracking is always going to have some value. And one of the things that I've been looking at over the last couple of years is this idea of passfilt or other complexity, password complexity plugins aren't really complexity checkers. They don't actually check for the entropy that's in the password. Really, they just check a certain set of constraints, right? So if you tell someone that they need to use a capital letter and they need to use a numeric in there, the idea of this person who's writing that constraint rule is saying, well, say it's an 8-character password. Well, if they just use lowercase alphas, 8 to the 26th combination. So that can be brute force pretty quickly. We don't use encryption keys that are 8 to the 26th key space, do we? So that can be brute force really trivially. And the idea of the rule is, well, if I make them do capitals, I change my key space to 8 to the 52. And if I make them do numerics, it makes it 8 to the 62. And if I make them do a special symbol, it's 8 to the 76, right? So that's great, right? 8 to the 76, I'm done. But the thing is, what the human really does is, if you make them put in a capital and you make them put in a numeric, you end up with a password that's like capital P password 1 or capital C change me 1, right? Because you met the constraint check. But there's really very, very little additional entropy between change me 1 and change me, because we put in the rule, we know how the human thinks, right? So so one of the things we want to do is you be able to put in what your proposed constraints are and see if they actually add some true entropy to the passwords that you're putting in there. And the more passwords we crack, the more we'll start to understand what passwords people end up using for certain constraints, right? So,
also in a brute force capacity, basically allowing uppercase, lowercase, symbols, numbers, it has a larger actual key space than something with password complexity requirements. So if you were to brute force the whole thing, and there were password complexity requirements, you wouldn't have to brute force all the simple passwords. You'd only have to brute force the ones that met the complexity requirements. So it's actually reducing the key space if you do that. So it doesn't necessarily result in a faster crack, but the key space is smaller, so the theoretical limit of the amount of work you have to do actually shrinks if you implement that stuff. So.
And the other thing we can do is, once we understand what these what the rules people are using in common, we can make rainbow tables for, we don't have to have a rainbow table of 8 to the 76th complexity if we know that people are capitalizing the first letter and they're doing and they're just tacking on numbers and symbols on the end or replacing. So the rainbow tables can be much more compact and fit on a system, yet cover that whole 8 or 9 or 10 to the 76th power of key space.
Yeah. The rainbow tables in the new version have been updated to be indexed, and they support the latest rainbow table stuff from the distributed rainbow table generation project and freerainbowtables.org. So you can actually just download a big old chunk of rainbow tables off the internet now, as opposed to having to generate them yourself. It's also faster because they're indexed rather than simply sorted. And you can get all kinds of different rainbow tables, from Land Manager to NTLM. We now support a relatively wide breadth of different shapes and sizes of those things. So.
How many gigabytes of rainbow tables do you have now?
I've almost filled up a terabyte drive with them, but that's, I've got a bunch of other stuff in there, like rainbow tables for WPA, which is actually pretty cool. I'll talk about how that might work later someday, but anyway.
Okay. Another future direction is the idea of password reuse within an organization. I'd like to come up with a way to solve the password reuse problem across organizations, because if you're using the same password for your login at your place of business, and you're also using it for your brother's blog that you administer for him on Linux running WordPress, that's a big problem, right? Because if someone steals that password hash and cracks it, and then they can use that to log into your organization. The usernames are all becoming the namespace is all becoming your email address, right? So your most common email address is starting to become your username everywhere. So now if I find your password on one system, I can go and try that same username, which is probably your email address because everyone's using that for password reset functionality across a huge amount of systems. Now, it's also potentially a problem within organizations, password reuse. I mean, how many organizations have the same password on every desktop or every laptop? Some sort of admin password or help desk password, or there's some agent that needs to have a password to log in somewhere. And people use local accounts for this stuff. And so there's a risk there if you're using local accounts with reused passwords. That's a risk in your organization, and it's a hidden risk because no one really knows what the other IT guy did one day when he installed this. It just sort of works. So to be able to come in as a IT security guy and find that risk by looking at what are all the username and passwords used across all the local password hash stores on the boxes, and correlate what that commonality is. So that's another potential future direction we're thinking about.
Looking at the possibility of adding some wireless stuff as well, doing various forms of active challenge response analysis. So specifically challenge injection. So if you have like an SMB request, somebody makes a tree open followed by here's a challenge. You spoof the challenge, say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Then they encrypt that challenge. It's a lot easier to crack that because the challenge is fixed. You feed it through a rainbow table and you're done. So that kind of thing, if you were willing to go active and inject, you can do a lot more cracking. So taking a look at protocols that have that as a dubious feature. WPA is one of them. So basically cracking anything that you can fix the salt for. A challenge is like a salt. You don't get to pick it usually, which is why it's complicated. So if we can pick it, then suddenly the hash is a lot more crackable. So we're going to be looking at ways to be more active as well.
So I'm just wondering if anyone in the room has any feature that they've ever thought about that they'd want to see in a password cracker. That they've used other tools out there. Go ahead.
Not so much a feature as an observation that you're mentioning the password constraints lead to lower entropy.
Mm-hmm.
Another problem that comes up that we've noticed is requiring users to change their password negatively impacts the strength of the passwords chosen. In that any employee who is asked to rotate their passwords every 90 days, inevitably after some number of years will go to a scheme where it is capital C, change me 1, 2, 3, 4, and then after a while, and they get after they've done this for 4 or 5 years, then they start to use the year and month because it's just too much trouble to remember all these different passwords.
Oh, sometimes
Definitely.
they'll stick a character on the front or on the end, like X.
Yeah.
It's always X.
Or eventually, there's only so much password history the system can store. So at some point they can start to wrap around again, right? If you're saving the last 5 passwords after, password history, if it's only keeping 5, when you get to the 6th year, you can go back to your first one again.
Yeah. Speaking of
So
that,
now you're in a cycle. You're done cracking passwords for all eternity because now you know that it'll always be in that cycle.
yeah, L0phtCrack. Well, because these password histories have to get stored somewhere, they get stored alongside all the regular hashes. So L0phtCrack actually dumps all of the last 5 or 10 passwords that you've had, not just the one you have currently, and cracks all of those. So at least you'll get to see if they're doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 thing. We actually probably can be able to find a way of detecting that and saying, look, this guy's just rotating his password 1 character every time. You might want to talk to him about password policy or something like that. This could be done in an automated fashion. We fully intend to do that.
Do you have any kind of automatic notification, and if I can schedule the audits
Yes.
off hours?
Yes. There's a actually I haven't checked lately. The scheduling features haven't changed in a little while.
It uses the Windows
But it
scheduler.
uses the Windows scheduler for that, and I'm not sure. I know that it generates a report on the screen. I would have to check again. I'll poke into the menu when we do the demo, and we'll answer your question then. I don't remember.
This feature set is so huge we can't even keep track of it.
I actually never use the scheduling feature that much because I kind of have one or two machines, not like 100. So we have beta testers who run this stuff on larger installations, and we'll talk about beta. We have a beta program going on, and we're going to be getting. If you have a particularly interesting environment that would benefit the project, if we could get data from that, that would be cool. Then come talk to us after. Anyway.
Have you thought about adding an entropy value determination on track to give them an entropy rating, and then setting a threshold so that you can say, alert the administrator that the following, everything below this threshold has
We do have that, but it's not entropy. It's basically how long did it take to crack? I mean, the problem is that these are not, the passwords are not machine generated, right? They're human generated. So the idea of entropy doesn't really exist because it's what a human usually thinks of, right? A machine can generate any level of entropy that you want, but humans fall into patterns of picking passwords, so we can use those patterns to find them. It's not, I don't know what to call it, but I don't think entropy really is the right way to do it.
Crack time is really the only useful metric because
It's
it's
correct.
how long can it last against a dedicated attacker.
Right, so can an adversary coming up with rules that try to mirror human behavior, how long does it take them to crack it? And so we need to come up with a word for that.
Yeah. It needs to be, point and click. It needs to be automated. It needs to be scheduled because when you're the good guy, you have to check that all of the passwords are safe. When you're the attacker, you only need to crack one password. So the attack mechanism is very different. We're trying to aim this feature toward people trying to audit lots of passwords, not simply one or two. So.
Yep.
Any plans to add support for live USB type distribution?
Yeah, we've thought about that. There are some
Perhaps the consultant
distributions out there right now that you could get, a boot disk that can do that. But sort of in the L0phtCrack spirit of things is like, take those disparate tools and integrate it in together. So we have thought of doing that.
We've considered that also for the purposes of doing simply account recovery. Like, I forgot the admin password. Stick this thing in there and have it just nuke the registry remotely or offline. Yeah, we've definitely considered that. There are a few tools that people use in and around this space. One is like Peter Nordahl's boot disk, that thing that lets you use Linux to edit the registry for Windows. That's amazingly cool, and we'll probably do something like that someday. And the USB, key bootable environment type thing is, also been thought of. So yeah, it's considered. We'll see how much time we have.
And a second question. I'm just curious, I think you partially answered this already, how the relevance of a cracker in the current attacks involve just hashing the hash, not even having to crack the hash.
Yeah.
How is LC6 relevant in today's middle attacks?
Sure. Well, if you have a hash, by itself, you can usually log into resources and just use the hash. That's just kind of how it is. If you can get the hash, generally, you're not necessarily done, but you're doing pretty good. That said, authentication isn't always centralized. Cracking a password is, yours truly has had issues where, a bulletin board system or something happened to have a password on it that got cracked, and then had happened to be like the same thing as my email password, et cetera, and you end up in ZFO4.txt, that kind of thing. So that kind of thing across domain, once you know what the passwords are that are being used, you have a better idea of how weak they are in general, and different hashes across different machines may use different salts under Unix. So if you do crack it, and then you just pass it through the next n number of salts for that user, suddenly you're going to find that he's using that password everywhere. So there are scenarios where knowing the exact password is valuable, and the casual attacker may just sit down at a keyboard and type the word password as the password to see if that's the password, and that's many times the password. So there are sometimes you're going to see shoulder surfers catch someone typing dog123 or the name of their cat or something, and because that they see that keystroke pattern, they're like, oh, okay, I know his password is now. That kind of thing. If you cause like password rotation and things like that, you're going to be, reducing the key space pretty quickly for the attacker. So knowing something about how that people choose passwords is still beneficial. And if you know something about a single password, you may find out about a lot of the passwords. I mean, there's reducing risk across the board here.
Well, there's also a whole other set of attacks that you're doing, passing the hash versus sort of acting as a legitimate user. Like once you can compromise, say you're, an administrator gone bad, it might be easier for you to do certain attacks impersonating legitimate users without putting any special tools on the system or compromising any system. So, I think the sophisticated attacker is going to want to be able to do both and pick and choose. Is there a host IDS? Is there a network IDS? What are the detections of different different intrusions happening, and sometimes logging in as a legitimate user is going to get audited, and that's going to be detected. So you want to bypass that and do something under the covers, use a vulnerability. But other times, using the vulnerability is going to get detected by an IDS, and logging in as a legitimate user is not. So I think that it's definitely something an attacker is going to want to be able to do both if possible.
Yeah, and face it, the attacker, the first thing they're going to do, they're going to sniff your network, then they're going to crack all the passwords, and then they're just going to use them everywhere. It's unfortunate, but that's just the attack pattern. So it is.
Sure.
It is straightforward. It's passive. It can be done offline, and they can usually get everything that they need to get without having done much more than simply dumping a bunch of hashes or listening to the packets on the wire. In the case of the sniffer, one of the things we also got back from Symantec was the rights to the software anti-sniff, which is a technology that I wrote a while back that detects whether someone is sniffing on a network segment or not. Uses a number of techniques to tell if somebody's listening. It's an eavesdropping, a bug detector, if you will. We're not sure of the future of that. We may just stick it back up there and let people use it. But there is a library version of that that's available for people who are developing IDS technologies that are interested in being able to provide passive sniffing detection. Come talk to us. We have some software for you.
Yeah, it's interesting that the last two of the last big, or at least the TJX credit card data breach, they had installed a sniffer on the machine that basically got the credit card data sent to it in the clear. And the easiest way for them to collect the data, because it actually got encrypted once it was put in the database, was to just sniff on the wire. So I think there's still a lot of relevance today to detecting sniffers on your network. It's just I don't know why no one else has come out with this sort of
Technique.
IDS technique. So I think we next. Well, here's some email addresses. It's l0phtCrack.com is the domain, And if you have any questions or are interested in purchasing it, you can send us email.
When is the website live?
Well, the website's live now, but it's just a
The stuff.
placeholder.
Yeah.
Um,
So maybe a couple weeks.
Yeah, about
like
about
1
a
or 2
couple
weeks.
weeks.
Probably by the end of the month, you'll see the website, and we'll have the ability to take orders online. Bulk orders, we'll have a special person dedicated to them if you want to buy a bunch of copies.
so you want to?
Yeah, I can give a demonstration if you guys want to see what it's all about. Let me throw this up here. Take this off.
What?
I'm gonna give it to you because I have the mic.
Okay.
I'm going to pray that this cable stays plugged in correctly. Don't mind me, I have my Super Mario Brothers JavaScript port up here. I've been playing around.
Do you want to give a demo of that?
No. Not ready yet. All right, let's see. Let's just pop the program up. I think
You're
I have
not
some-
on this.
I'm not up. Where? Okay. We'll give it another second to figure out that I'm here.
No.
No. Okay. Try this again. It's plugged in.
Yep.
Nothing.
I'm trying.
Yeah, that's what I hit.
F4.
All right. I love this stuff here.
Oh, looks like something's happening.
Oh, I got the blinkies. Okay, there we go. Great. All right, I'm just gonna throw the program up. The installer is just sort of one-click standard type of thing. It uses the WinPCAP driver to do network sniffing, so yeah, prompted to install that. It's Visual Studio 2008 program, so you'll get a redistributable install when you do this. It's an x86 program, so it's going to run in with WoW64 or WoW32 or whatever it's called. One of the new features is the ability to analyze and dump hashes from 64-bit systems. This requires a bunch of different techniques in getting around things that are put in place to I don't know. There are a lot of techniques for dumping hashes these days, and 64-bit just definitely threw a wrench in the old version. So the look and feel has been updated pretty significantly. As you can see, it's got a ribbon style interface, much like Office. It's got the black Office theme, which I thought was pretty cool. Wizards are all skinned and all that stuff. So you have the standard assortment of dumping techniques. You can retrieve passwords from local machine. You hit next. Say I want to do a strong password audit, and it goes right here, and you get to choose whether you want to see the hashes or you want to see the passwords when they're audited.
We actually got that feature request from a big organization. They said, we love cracking passwords. We want to know when passwords can be cracked, but we don't want our admins to be able to see what the password is. So they said, if you just had a checkbox which said, don't display the password once cracked, that will meet our criteria and we can use your tool. So I said, oh, okay, we'll add that feature if you order a lot of copies. So it's optional. You can choose not to see the password.
Let's see, I have a password file laying around here. I don't know if I actually shipped the default password things for the program. So, all right, I'll just import from the local machine. We'll hope that my passwords are secure in the box. Import. Well, I can see I've got a user called Monkey. I've got a user called Administrator here. And there's some bugs because it's
It's beta.
It's still a beta, but you can see there's some VMware users there. Some of the users have empty LM passwords. Guest is disabled, but has no password apparently. The LAN manager hash is missing for some of the accounts, specifically the service accounts. But it is present for things that are administrative or local login. And that's just so people can log into their old Windows 95 boxes and whatnot. So you'll see we've added a progress meter. We've done all this docking stuff that comes with the app wizard. It's pretty cool. All right.
Do you want to crack to show
Yeah,
the?
sure. I'll just run a crack real quick. A little more room here. They have a little statistics bar on the side, as we've always had, that tells you where things are going, and sessions options page that lets you choose what dictionaries that you want to use, whether you want to do hybrid cracking or not, or you want to use a rainbow table set, and the character sets used for brute force.
Those are sort of set in the order of complexity of the password, and see, you can see the hybrid was always take dictionaries and then cycle some of the positions with random characters to try to get that password 1 type of thing, but it's not intelligent. It's just prepend, postpend, and we'd like to make it more intelligent based on a rule set of how human behavior deals with password constraints.
The hybrid cracking is pretty interesting. It also supports a lot of the weird things people do, like leet speak, numbers changing onto letters that look similar, which is a homographic substitution for anybody really interested into this stuff. The crack NTLM password stuff comes from the fact that NTLM uppercases everything before it hashes it. So if you get the LM password cracked, it can be like foo, all capitals, but the NTLM password might be capital F, lowercase oo. So we go through all of the capitalization substitutions to figure out what the NTLM password is once you've got the LM password. So those kinds of accelerations are in place as well. So I'll just hit OK here, and we hit go, and you'll see. Oops, we grabbed that. Let's try this again. Again, beta. Let's try this again. The joy of doing it live. I'm gonna do it live.
Don't click on the screen, just hit. Oh, there it's going.
There we go. All right, so you see the statistics going off here. Those are the dictionary crack that's being run.
Well, you can see here that monkey is 9 characters ending with exclamation, explanation, and administrator is 8 characters ending in apostrophe. It's pretty hard to see there, but
Because the hash is split up into 7 characters and then another 7 characters, you get to crack the last half of the password, at the same speed that you would be cracking the first half. So making your password longer until it reaches like 16 or 15 or more characters isn't actually meaning you anything.
yeah, until you get over 14
Right.
Characters.
Right.
Length doesn't really
as
matter.
the passwords eventually get cracked, and you'll see the brute force attack is running there. It takes a little while, but you can see I'm getting a key rate here, about 5 million keys a second. It's pretty quick for LAN manager because the hash is only executed once. LAN manager hash has got a DES round on it. The NTLM stuff is MD4, single round, basically, or maybe 2 rounds, but it's still small in comparison to some of the Unix hashes. I found recently as the SHA-256 and SHA-512 support was added, and we added Blowfish as well, so you can crack all your BSD and latest Linux, so Red Hat Enterprise systems. That they took the SHA-2 algorithm for, say, the SHA-512 and did like 1,000 rounds of that, which slows the hash down significantly and makes it harder to crack. So you're dividing by 1,000. The mechanism for SHA is actually made a little more complex anyway. So longer crack times become more frustrating, but the dictionary and hybrid attacks are still very valid, and the brute force attack simply takes longer than you'd like to wait. But a clever dictionary with clever human style hybrid attacks goes a long way, and you get a lot of the results anyway. So So yeah, it's gonna take a little while to do the brute force here. I'm actually gonna go through the whole thing because
It's going to take 4 hours.
it'll take
But-
4 hours to push through the entire key space.
But that's the entire key space for a landman in 4 hours now on modern
hardware.
and this is just a laptop. I mean,
You'll find people doing this kind of cracking on GPUs these days as well. We're considering doing that in order to provide parallelism and acceleration. This is
L0phtCrack
all-
has always been multi-threaded. That's
this
been
is
one
got
of the
dual-
benefits of it.
Dual CPU, so you can, as you have like an 8 CPU machine, you're going to get the benefit of that. We also accelerated rainbow tables for using multi-core. So rather than being heavily single-threaded like most rainbow table implementations are, it's multi-core. So you crack a lot of passwords very quickly with the rainbow tables implementation. So yeah, it takes a little while. So I'm just not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm going to go through some of the other stuff here, just so you can see. There's a sniffer. You click the sniffer, and I'm going to go ahead and hit stop. You can see there are network adapters, and you pick,
Do you want to do the Wi-Fi?
Wi-Fi link. You can say start sniffing, and it'll sit around for a while. And if there are actual authentications happening, it'll eventually pick them up. I have no idea if we're actually going to get anything here, but
This is the Starbucks module.
eventually this will have the opportunity. This is where you're going to find the active injection stuff, where the challenge is actually actively modified as the authentication is being done. That way, things can be cracked faster.
Do you only look at SMB traffic, or do you look at any NTLM that's done? Or?
Right now, it is specifically looking at SMB authentication. That's it, right now. But there are other types of NTLM SSB activity that would be worth sniffing, including exchange activity, RPC activity, that kind of stuff. That's all fair play, and we may add that eventually. So, yeah. Right now, SMB is kind of the thing. So, I'm not going to sit around and wait for that to happen. But apparently, I have the schedule disabled because the key that I generated for myself.
Yeah, you have the
didn't
consultant
have
version.
I don't have the right version installed. The admin version has that, so I'd have to generate a key for myself. I need to make a super duper key for myself or something. But yeah, you can see here that you can select cracked accounts or weak passwords or expired accounts as they get cracked, and it'll select them in the file list or the user list here. There's a reporting feature. I believe that it's not working at the moment, but you'll see that on the reporting side there's a bunch of pie charts and graphs about password strength and a bunch of analysis and averaging and things like that. So you can rate your passwords and things like that. But for some reason, again, my beta copy here is still in beta. So.
The thing you can do is you can import, and the scheduler does this, but you can actually import from many, many different machines and bring them into one cracking session. And then if you crack that password, it knows what machine that came from. And if you want to do a password reset on that, it will go out to that machine. So the idea is there's efficiencies to doing many, cracking the passwords from many, many different machines all at the same time. So we take advantage of that with the scheduler. You go out and collect all your hashes and crack them all at once, or use rainbow tables or whatever.
Is there a way that you can audit what the person who's using this in the environment? If you're in the enterprise environment, like that one company that
Right.
Sure.
doesn't want people to see the passwords, you want to make sure that
It's
you
a great idea. We should hook this into the NT event logger and say, as a security event, that L0phtCrack was fired up on the network and it was done by this user at this time, and that end passwords were cracked when they were, and that it was closed at a certain time. Yeah, auditing would be a great feature. Thanks for suggesting that. We'll actually probably do it. Maybe we'll give you credit on that.
Of course, we'll have a checkbox that says don't audit me.
But it's a good that's a good one, especially for consultants, because you want those people to leave a trail. You just do. You bring them into your network. You want them to leave a trail as they do their work. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I wish I had more buttons to click and more little dialogues to show you, but what it does is pretty straightforward. The support for older password file formats and things like that are still in there, so you can import your old LC files if you want to for some reason, but importing new ones is generally a good idea on a regular basis. PW dump has been supplanted. We are no longer using it directly. We actually have upgraded to PhysGig's FGDump. You will find that that is a completely superior password dumping program. It's amazingly well put together for what it does. It incorporates all the cache dump style functionality. It is a GPL program. We are shipping it as an executable along with the source, so you can play around with it. And you'll note that there are many other features in FGDump that are not touched by L0phtCrack specifically. If you want to use FGDump to generate a dump file and then feed it into L0phtCrack, feel free to look through its copious amount of command line options. You will find things for remotely disabling virus scanners, amongst other things, because many times dumping passwords remotely these days causes a lot of red flags. If you actually want to do it a little more quietly, you'll see that those options are still in there if you do it from the command line. So, any other questions?
Well, thanks.
All right.
Thanks for coming.
Visit the website in a few weeks, and if you want to participate in the beta, come see us, and we'll talk to you. All right, thanks a lot, guys.
Bye.
Lights.
Where the lights at? Hey, John, how's it going?
It's going good.
Good to
That's
see you.
It's great. So is the